I mean, I learnt to play the blues, Alexis Corner, really. Brian Jones and Keith Root used to play Jimmy Reed all day on a little machine. And then I heard Jerry Mulligan's Walking Shoes, and I wanted to play the drum.
When the entire world of rock and roll was a symphony of screams, rebellion, and headline-grabbing scandals, Charlie Watts simply tapped a beat and made everything stand still. No grand solos, no shirtless stage antics, no wild declarations. He was the embodiment of absolute contrast in a band famous for never standing still. For nearly 6 decades as the drummer of the Rolling Stones, the group hailed as the greatest rock band of all time. Charlie never tried to stand out. He stepped back behind blazing guitars, chart-topping hits, and endless scandals. But it was that very retreat that made him irreplaceable. No one in the Rolling Stones lived as decently as he did, and no one endured as long. While his bandmates married, divorced, rebelled, and reinvented themselves, he stayed with one woman his whole life. He wore tailored suits while the others went shirtless. He sipped tea while they snorted cocaine. And he held the band together with something no one could see: the rhythm of stability. Charlie Watts never tried to become a legend, and that is precisely why he became one. This is the story of the only man who made the world of rock go silent, just to hear a single simple beat. And in that silence we realized what keeps us grounded is not always the sound, but the quiet force behind it. Early life. Charlie Watts was born on June 2, 1941 in Bloomsbury, central London, right at the time when World War II was engulfing Britain in bombs and fear. His early years had no stage lights, no lively music, only air raid sirens, underground shelters, and skies thick with dust and smoke. He grew up amid the rubble of a post-war city, where everything felt fragile, except for the steady rhythm of time itself. His father, Charles Richard Watts, was a train driver, a calm, disciplined, and reliable man. The family wasn't wealthy, but they weren't destitute either. They lived in a modest home in Wembley, where Charlie quickly learned to value order in the midst of chaos, something he would later bring to music as if it were second nature. Even as a child, Charlie stood apart from the other kids. While his friends played football and shouted on the streets, young Charlie was captivated by sound, the rumble of trains, the patter of rain on the window, and especially the jazz pouring from the family's old radio. At age 10, when he first heard the horn of Charlie Parker, he didn't just like it, he was obsessed. To him, jazz wasn't just a genre. It was how the world should work: subtle, spontaneous, yet always underpinned by a hidden structure. Since his family couldn't afford a drum set, he made his first kit out of pencils and tin lids. He tapped on chairs, tables, and even his own chest. That's how Charlie learned rhythm. By age 14, his parents, though not well off, managed to save enough to buy him his first real drum kit. No one knew then that this gift would one day keep time for one of the greatest bands in history for 6 decades. Beyond music, Charlie also showed a gift for visual art. He studied graphic design at Harrow Art School, where he honed his sensitivity to shape, structure, and classic aesthetics, qualities that would later define both his music and personal style. At a time when rock was beginning to rebel, Charlie chose tailored suits, French fashion magazines, and quiet afternoons with Miles Davis. His childhood wasn't marked by tragedy, but neither was it filled with careless laughter. Charlie Watts was not a product of hardship or loss. He was a product of an era that demanded people who could stay calm so the world wouldn't fall apart. And from that childhood, he learned this: sometimes the most solid thing in life is a steady beat in the middle of chaos. Early career. Charlie Watts didn't enter music to become famous. He didn't chase the spotlight, nor did he dream of glittering stages. His original goal was far simpler: to play jazz in a small room for people who truly listened. But destiny, as it often does, didn't ask for permission before changing the course of his life. After graduating from Harrow Art School, Charlie worked at an advertising firm in London as a graphic designer. By day, he was a visual artist. By night, he played drums in local nightclubs, most notably in Alexis Corner's blues jazz band, which gathered pioneering British interpreters of African-American music. It was there that he caught the attention of two young men trying to build a new band, Mick Jagger and Brian Jones. In January 1963, after several rounds of persuasion, Charlie Watts joined the Rolling Stones, at the time still a nameless group playing in London pubs. But he wasn't thrilled. To him, rock was loud and sloppy, lacking structure and depth. What convinced him wasn't money, but the sense that this band was genuinely trying to do something serious. And more importantly, they needed someone who could keep time, literally. In the early days, Charlie juggled music with his design work to make ends meet. At their first gigs, he often brought his sketch pad, drawing the stage, the audience, and sometimes even the band itself. He went on to design many of their album covers, promotional posters, and visual aesthetics, though he rarely took credit. On stage, Charlie refused to show off. While Keith Richards charged forward and Mick Jagger screamed and writhed, Charlie stayed behind, seated at his drum kit, face expressionless, tapping out beats as if he were speaking to himself. But that restraint became his signature. He never overplayed, never missed a beat, and never lost his cool. Remarkably, though he played rock, he never abandoned jazz. In those early Stones years, Charlie continued performing in underground jazz projects, recording vintage swing tracks, and practicing with the discipline of a classical pianist, refusing to let rock erase who he truly was. The world didn't know who Charlie Watts was during his first year drumming for the Stones, but within the band, they knew this much. Without him, the whole machine would fall out of rhythm. And so it was that a jazz lover, who never sought fame, became the timekeeper of the greatest rock band on earth. A quiet beginning, but never a small one. Career success. As the Rolling Stones exploded in the late 1960s, the world became intoxicated with Mick Jagger's rebellion, Keith Richards' untamed wildness, and their unrelenting roaring sound. In that whirlwind, Charlie Watts held his ground, seated behind the drums, hands keeping time, eyes observing, never once crossing the line he had drawn for himself. From Satisfaction, Paint It Black, Jumpin' Jack Flash, Gimme Shelter, to Start Me Up, every iconic Stones track shared one constant, a drum beat that was solid, simple, unflashy, yet irreplaceable. Charlie never tried to overdo it, and because of that, his music never aged. Unlike many of his contemporaries, drummers who shouted, flailed, and showed off, Charlie focused solely on what he believed was right, keeping the rhythm so others could shine. To him, drumming wasn't about proving his skill, it was about holding everything together. For over 50 years, he didn't miss a single show, not when he was tired, not when he was sick, not even after undergoing cancer treatment. He showed up on time, dressed in a suit, carrying his worn drum kit, quietly taking his place, saying little. To the band, it wasn't just professionalism, it was security. Many colleagues have said that if Mick Jagger was the Stones' burning heart and Keith Richards its fire-blooded soul, then Charlie Watts was the central nervous system, the one who kept everything running smoothly without anyone noticing. He never overplayed, but without him, we'd fall apart, Keith once admitted. Outside the Stones, Charlie never let go of his love for jazz. He formed the Charlie Watts Quintet, the Charlie Watts Orchestra, small projects but critically acclaimed. To him, jazz wasn't a way to make money. It was a way home. It was his own voice, when he didn't have to keep time for anyone else. In 1989, Charlie Watts was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame alongside the Rolling Stones. But unlike his bandmates, who beamed with joy, he quietly accepted his plaque, smiled softly, and avoided the cameras. To him, the greatest award was still being here, still playing, and still being myself. In an industry that worships noise and spectacle, Charlie Watts made restraint his declaration and loyalty his definition of success. He was never the most dazzling presence on stage, but he was the one whose absence would mean it simply wasn't the Rolling Stones anymore. Turmoil and the silence that roared. For someone as quiet as Charlie Watts, Turmoil never erupted like fire. It smoldered like embers beneath ash, visible only to those who truly paid attention. Throughout his journey with the Rolling Stones, a band riddled with scandal, drugs, infamy, and internal strife, Charlie was almost an exception. But that didn't mean his life was peaceful. In the early 1980s, during a period of intense internal tension and an exhausting tour schedule, Charlie, the man long known for his restraint and discipline, fell into a midlife crisis. He began drinking heavily, even using tranquilizers, becoming irritable and withdrawn. "I was like a ghost. A middle-aged man who no longer knew what he was doing or who he was drumming for," he later confessed. No one could have imagined that this man, who had never screamed, never faltered on stage, once came close to losing his marriage and his sanity in just a few years of surrender. But unlike many rock musicians who spiraled endlessly, Charlie pulled himself back. Not through rehab centers or tearful interviews, but through silent action, quitting all substances, spending time with his wife, and returning to the practice room like a beginner. One of the rare times Charlie ever got angry, and it became legend in rock circles, was the punch to Mick Jagger's face in Amsterdam, 1984. After a drunken night, Mick phoned Charlie's hotel room at 5 a.m. and yelled, "Where's my drummer?" Charlie got up, shaved, put on a suit, walked to Mick's hotel, knocked on the door, and when Jagger opened it, he punched him square in the face and said coldly, "I'm not your drummer. You're my singer." It wasn't just a blow to Mick Jagger's ego. It was a silent declaration from the man who had stood behind the band for years, carrying the weight without asking for credit. From that moment on, the band understood. Charlie didn't speak much, but he had his limits. Throughout his career, rumors swirled that Charlie wanted to leave the band because he was exhausted and because he felt increasingly disconnected from the music he truly loved. More than once, he quietly returned home to tend his horses, refused to join tours, or skipped group photo shoots. Yet he always came back, not for fame, but for commitment. "I stayed because they needed me, and because I couldn't not play," he said simply. Charlie Watts's deepest conflict wasn't found in scandal, but in the feeling of not belonging in the very place he was holding together. A jazz musician living in a rock world, loud, chaotic, and fleeting, he felt like a man out of time. But instead of resisting, he wielded restraint as his weapon, used silence to endure, and turned drumming into a way to balance both the band and himself. Perhaps the price of holding everything together is carrying it all inside. Charlie understood that, and he accepted it, in silence. Personal life? In a music industry where love is often measured by tabloid appearances, Charlie Watts chose to live as if the world had never invented paparazzi. He married one woman, and only one, for nearly 60 years, while his bandmates cycled through divorces, remarriages, and romantic scandals. In 1964, when the Rolling Stones were still an up-and-coming name, Charlie married Shirley Ann Shepard, a sculptor. Their wedding had no lavish ceremony, no prenup, and not a single official photo published in music magazines. It was just two people and one unshakable commitment. "She's my rock," Charlie once said, one of the rare times he spoke publicly about his private life. They had a daughter, Serafina, born in 1968, and later a granddaughter, Charlotte. But Charlie was never a public father. He protected his family by disappearing. He didn't bring his daughter to red carpets, didn't appear at premieres with his wife. They lived mostly in rural Devon, where he kept a small farm and raised Arabian horses, his true passion outside the drums. Charlie didn't drive, disliked flying, had no social media accounts, and avoided unnecessary public events. While Mick Jagger was the media face and Keith Richards the symbol of rebellion, Charlie became the embodiment of dignity in silence. He loved tailored suits, owning over 200, each custom-made and meticulously chosen. People called him the best-dressed man in rock, though he never once tried to earn that title. In 2004, he was diagnosed with throat cancer, despite having quit smoking long ago. Charlie underwent treatment quietly, no press conference, no public call for prayers. He stepped back from touring briefly, then returned as if nothing had happened, on time, in rhythm, and still not speaking about himself. Here's a little-known detail. For decades, Charlie didn't sleep in the same hotels as the other Stones. He often stayed elsewhere, quieter, closer to home, then showed up each night, right on time, played his set, took a bow, and disappeared. To him, music was a job, a sacred job, but not his whole life. And perhaps because of that, he kept everything so many other artists lost: privacy, peace, a lasting home, and an untarnished character. In an era where everything could be commodified, Charlie Watts held on to the hardest thing to keep: himself. And at the end of it all, when the world hailed him as one of the greatest drummers of all time, he simply shrugged. "I'm not a rock star, I'm just a drummer." Number. He was the drummer every rock star wanted to stand beside. Death, a silent shock. In August 2021, just as the Rolling Stones were preparing to resume their postponed No Filter tour following the COVID-19 pandemic, fans received a brief and unexpected announcement from Charlie Watts' spokesperson. He would not be joining the tour this time, as he needed to recover from a surgical procedure. No one said what kind of surgery. No one disclosed how serious it was. Just the familiar line: "Charlie needs time to rest." And the world believed it, because for nearly 60 years, he had never missed a show. On August 24, 2021, Charlie Watts passed away at a private hospital in London, aged 80. No sirens, no leaks to the press. Death came just like he lived, sudden, quiet, without warning. That minor surgery turned out to be the final thing he experienced. The official statement said only this: Charlie Watts, a cherished husband, father, grandfather, and one of the greatest drummers in the history of rock and roll, passed away peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by his family. There was no public funeral, no stadium memorial. The family held a private ceremony, just as he had wished. No one knows exactly where he was laid to rest, and perhaps no one needs to, because Charlie never belonged to the noise. His passing sent a cultural shockwave through the global music community. Around the world, artists, from rock to jazz, fell silent in reverence for his loss. Paul McCartney called him the most solid and elegant drummer I've ever met. Elton John wrote, "No one played like Charlie, and no one was silent like him." Keith Richards, who had clashed with Charlie and survived everything, posted only a photo of an empty drum kit. Nothing more. And that was enough. And Mick Jagger? At the first show without Charlie, he looked down at the stage, stood still for a long moment in front of the mic, and said, "This is for Charlie." The Rolling Stones continued the tour. Steve Jordan, a drummer who had worked with Keith Richards, filled in, but everyone understood. It was just technical rhythm. The real heartbeat of the band had stopped. When the timekeeper leaves, there is no chaos. No screaming, just an emptiness, deep enough, real enough, painful enough for the world to realize some people don't need to say goodbye. They only need to disappear. And the world goes silent. Legacy and influence. Charlie Watts never shouted anything. He never demanded to be remembered. But after he left this world, millions still looked toward the back of the stage, where one man had sat for nearly 60 years, and acknowledged, without him, the Rolling Stones were never truly the Rolling Stones. In music, Charlie was the definition of restraint. In a culture that glorified flash and flare, where drummers often battled for the spotlight with solos in every song, he chose to drum for the song, not for the ego. Not fast, not loud, never overpowering. Charlie held back half a beat, and in doing so made everything around him shine brighter. His steadiness in Gimme Shelter, the space he left in Paint It Black, or that barely whispered push in Sympathy for the Devil, all proved that sometimes music doesn't need more. It just needs the right thing at the right moment. Strangely, the more he stepped back, the more unforgettable he became. He never gave long speeches, never stood front and center, never played up for the camera. Yet the greatest artists, from Ringo Starr to Dave Grohl, from Paul McCartney to Questlove, considered him a benchmark, a compass, the man who kept order in the world of rock and roll. To them, Charlie wasn't inspiring because of technique, but because of attitude. He didn't preach work ethic, he lived it. And that's what gave it weight. Charlie's legacy isn't just in recordings, it's in how he lived. He was a rare example of a true gentleman in an industry that often erodes character. No scandals, no broken marriages, no appearances where he didn't need to be. Charlie made decency a habit, never asking to be praised for it. Nearly 60 years with one wife, thousands of performances never missed, over 200 tailored suits, a horse farm, and a life lived away from the spotlight. Every detail said more than any public statement ever could. To the Rolling Stones, Charlie was the heartbeat. No one said that while he was alive, but they all knew. When Keith Richards was worn out, when Jagger lost tempo, Charlie was still there, drumming, never complaining, never falling apart. He wasn't the front man, he wasn't the leader, but he was the one who kept it all from collapsing. And only after he was gone did the band truly realize what they had lost. The shows went on. Steve Jordan took the drum seat, but everyone admitted, we're moving forward, but it will never be the same. Some artists leave behind hit singles, albums, or names tied to entire genres. Charlie Watts left something else, a way of being, a rhythm, a reminder that you don't have to be loud to be great. You just have to be on time, on beat, and strong enough to never lose yourself. And because of that, though he is gone, the music goes on, with a quiet gap at the back. No one sits there now, but people still listen, as if Charlie is still keeping time from somewhere far away. Charlie Watts was never the first to walk on stage. He was never the last to leave. But for nearly 60 years, he was always on time, in place, and in rhythm. In a world where everything rushes forward, where artists reinvent themselves just to survive, Charlie chose to stay still, keeping time for the faster, the flashier, the more lost. And then one day, he stood up and quietly walked away, just as gently as he came. He didn't leave behind scandals to be gossiped about, or final words to be remembered. Just an absence, behind the drums, behind the shows, behind the music of a legendary band, where one man had silently held it all together. Perhaps in the entertainment world, where voices must always be loud and presence always dazzling, the greatest legacy is the ability to be silent. Not because there's nothing to say, but because you know when to let the music speak for you. Charlie Watts lived that way, and left that way. And you? Have you ever listened to the Rolling Stones and felt as if a heartbeat was holding you steady, even as the world shook around you? If so, share that moment. Because perhaps you too are carrying what Charlie left behind, a quiet beat that never loses direction. Leave your comment below, and if you still hear that drumming somewhere in your mind, then don't forget, the timekeeper never truly disappears.